Well, good afternoon, everybody.
I know your face anyway.
Yeah. I used to be in St. Michael.
Yes.
In the choir.
Yes, I
for a long time.
remember.
Yeah.
Now
Good
you said it.
afternoon.
You know when you
Am I
know.
coming through? Or is it just me?
I think you're talking to yourself.
Just me.
Yes.
Need it up.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How can you keep
Hello.
Turn the game down.
I wish you were anyway.
Yeah, I can't stop.
Yeah.
No, I can't
Talk
stop
to me
on
later.
myself. So I'll keep talking. Keep talking. Keep talking while people. Yeah, I'll keep talking. You can play around until you get it without the
We
whistle.
get a.
Yeah, without the whistle. Hello.
Yeah.
You might be
Good
too
evening.
close.
Oh, good afternoon.
Better.
I'm getting a few nods, so obviously people can hear me. Yes?
Yes.
Good. Well, welcome back to Costa. It's great to be here, and thank you so much again for those who look after us, and back for Cafe Church. So again, it's good, isn't it, to be back together after such a long time. And what a special guest we have this afternoon for our
Return.
Oh, and we've gone.
Hello. It's me. It is still whistling.
It's
a bit.
whistling.
It is whistling. Oh. Hello.
We'll probably hear you if you're still on. You know, you've got a good carrying voice.
I have, yeah, but you probably wouldn't hear me. So we'll do this, but I'm not, nothing again. So, never
Do you want to share a microphone, Derek?
You might be too close to the speaker.
I know COVID and all that, but if you've been triple jabbed, I'm willing to take the risk if you are.
Probably I don't need a microphone, I can shout. So, yeah, okay. I'm not coming through, am I? No. You are?
You might be too close to the speaker.
Am I?
Am I too close to the speaker, do you think?
Borrow his microphone.
That's all right.
If it'll do for you, it'll do for me. Oh, I sound really loud. I am the voice of the Mr. Ons.
That's why you all sat there, absolutely. We have a very special guest this afternoon. We have Bishop Mark. Now, I have it on good authority that you are not the Bishop of Worcester. Is that right?
I am not the Bishop of Worcester. Do you want to explain why you're telling that joke, though?
Apparently, at the General Synod, the Bishop of Worcester was due to sort of speak for a debate and couldn't, and so someone else stood in.
Yeah, so I got a text 3 minutes before the England-Scotland rugby match kicked off. So the reason we lost by such a stupid result is because the Bishop of Worcester distracted me from praying for the proper result on Murrayfield. So you can blame him. And if you follow the news over Christmas and you want to send get well cards to him, they can be addressed to the Lord Bishop and his sexy wife, Worcester. And if you don't get that, look back over the news. Cause I tell you, he got us into trouble. Those of us who didn't say that got us into trouble with our wives.
Yeah, imagine. But you are the Bishop of Chester, aren't you?
So they say, yes, I am the Bishop of Chester.
Thank you so much for coming to us this afternoon. Obviously, we're looking forward to hearing your story. So, would you like to begin by saying yes, where you were born and how things sort of progressed?
What would you do if I said no, Derek? I wouldn't like to do
I'd say drink your tea.
So what do you want to know? Where was I born? I was born in Canada, as you can tell from my rich Canadian accent. And then moved back here when I was about 18 months old. So I spent most of my life growing up around England. Moved around all over the shop because my dad was a medical doctor. So I've lived in more houses than I've had hot dinners, I tell you.
You don't get many hot dinners.
No.
So where would you then sort of say home was? Or you just sort of moved around a lot, did you?
Moved around a whole lot, and honestly, home is where family is.
Yeah.
So I've got, let me get the numbers the right way around, otherwise I'll cause a scandal. I've got one wife and 2 children. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I got that question down.
Yeah, I agree. And the kids are both off at university, but honestly, we really believe the Lord sends us to where He wants us to go, and we make home there. And it's great to come back to Chester. I was ordained here last millennium, did my curacy on the other side of the diocese, so Chester feels really homely to us.
So, sort of, what about sort of Christian sort of background? Did you go to church as a child? Was there a sort sort of a Christian influence within the family?
Yeah, I did. Basically, all four of my grandparents were converted as teenagers. And I mean, it's quite miraculous, really. So my granddad, my mum's dad, he was from the kind of East End of London, so really one of 9 alcoholic parents, and just really rough background. But there was this Plymouth Brethren mission just at the end of their street, and they used to go along because they got biscuits apparently or something. I can't quite remember the story. Anyway, he came to faith, but then he was called up for the Second War, part of the Yorkshire Regiment. And it's just one of those stories which is almost impossible to believe looking back, but I've genuinely seen the Bible. He had a Bible in his backpack because he'd come to know the Lord. And one night, he and his unit were advancing, they were climbing a hill. And he says, he's with the Lord now, but he described it to me, it was as if he was kicked in the back. He didn't know what happened, but he was knocked over. And there were voices around him he didn't understand. He realised, of course, they were German soldiers. And it wasn't until later, when they'd taken him to a kind of temporary holding thing, he took off his backpack and he discovered he hadn't been kicked in the back, he'd been shot, and the bullet had literally gone through some ration packs he had in there and had lodged itself in his Bible. And honestly, my aunt and uncle live down near Woking, they've still got the Bible. You can see the bullet hole going almost all the way through. And without getting all biological on you, my mum was conceived after the war. So my life literally depends upon the fact that my grandfather found faith and he had that Bible in his backpack. So it's just amazing really looking back, isn't it? Yeah.
So what about you then personally then? Sort of when did you sort of feel as though, yes, you needed to make a decision for yourself?
Yeah, so my parents obviously grew up with that. They kind of rebelled a bit, as young adults sometimes will, and you know, I won't exactly say live the wild life, but didn't really go to church for a few years. But then, so I've got a brother and a sister, but my sister's quite close in age to me. And they have that kind of guilt thing that parents often get of, we really ought to go to church to take the kids to Sunday school. So they started taking to Sunday school, to a Baptist Sunday school, and it was there, aged 8. I remember somebody drawing that picture. You might have seen it with kind of us on one side and God on the other, but there's this massive gap in the middle. And just explaining that without God there was this gap between us. And then of course they stick a cross in the middle of it and they say that's the bridge, and that actually that's what Jesus did on the cross. And it kind of made sense to an 8-year-old's brain. So I took a little booklet called 2 Ways to Live, went home, prayed that prayer. I was 8 years old, so that was 17 years ago.
So you haven't aged.
And of course it's been up and down since then, but since that day really I've had that sense that Jesus is my best friend, that I want to follow him. I don't always get it right, that's the understatement of the millennium, but that actually this is who I am. I remember aged 15, 16, I was still going to a Baptist church before I'd seen the light and joined the true church and then left it and joined the Anglican church. So the way they do it in the Baptist church is there are baptisms and then the minister stands there dripping wet at the front because it's all been done in a big bath at the front of church, and just says, if this is for you, if you need to commit your life to Jesus, you need to come forward. And I remember I was sitting about 2/3 of the way back on the right-hand side of church, surrounded by women, or girls obviously aged 15, I rather fancied, and what have you, I had tears streaming down the face, thinking this is not cool, Jesus, but tonight's the night when I kind of sign up as a young adult. Because either this is true, and it deserves every part of my life, or it really isn't, and it really doesn't. Yeah. Can't remember what you asked, but that was that an answer.
That's an answer, definitely. 15. So what kind of happened after that then? Obviously, did you sort of continue sort of quite kind of sort of daily with your walk with God, with Jesus, or sort of did things come along that kind of distracted you, or did you just sort of move forward and continue and things like that?
I'm really dull, Derek, so I'm not dull, Derek, that's you, but I'm really dull as well. So I haven't had any major kind of falling away from Jesus. It just makes sense to me. And I get the most common question I'll ask when I'm in school is, how can there possibly be a God of love when this has happened? And often it's a really personal story, my auntie's got cancer, or this has happened, or how can you possibly believe in a God of love? And the problem I have is, my honest answer is, I don't know what I would do if I didn't believe in a God of love in that kind of situation. Because I'm going to say a bit about this later, I don't really believe in a God who kind of enters a Harry Potter style relationship with us and gives us a wand where we wave it and everything becomes right. I believe in a God who walks with us. That's what the cross is about. He walks with us through all of this stuff. And because it makes sense to me, it just, life fits together with Jesus in the middle of it. So I'm afraid I haven't, rebelled or done this. I've bought loads of motorbikes, but again, that's common sense in my life.
We'll come on to that in a moment, Alec. So, did you always kind of feel as though one day you might be a bishop?
Not a bishop, no. In fact, I remember as a teenager looking at the Anglican vicar, because I was in the Boys Brigade, so we always turned up for the Remembrance Day parade. And he looked like some kind of great bat with this funny flappy cloak thing. And I used to think to myself, will you get real? Who wears this kind of stuff today? You Anglicans don't know what on earth you're talking about. So no, if you'd have told me I'd be a vicar, let alone a bishop, not in a million years. The odd thing, when I was about 14 though, went along to something called Spring Harvest, a big Christian festival, still happens today. And I remember sitting in a big youth meeting and there was this guy at the front who was talking. And he said, some of you here today are being called to be full-time Christian ministers. And I sat there, I've always been really logical, so my first degree is in mathematics. And I remember my head going, you're too young to respond to this. And my heart going, yeah, but that's you. And having this kind of real tension between thinking I was too young, but knowing that God was calling me into some type of full-time Christian ministry. Never had any idea it would be Anglican, and as I say, would have run as far as possible away from it, really.
Yes, I sympathise with you. So, okay, you went off to university, you did maths. When did the sort of call to, well, you mentioned the call to full-time ministry, how did that kind of then progress?
Yeah, so I chatted to a Baptist minister who was a really wise bloke, still friends with him today, and he said you need to wait till you're really, really old before you can go into ministry. So kind of 30 years old or something like that. I mean, almost Zimmer frame territory, really, when you're like 16, 17, thinking about it. So go and do something you love. And I loved three things. Farming, I'd grown up farming. I thought I'd quite like to be a copper, or I wanted to teach mathematics, because I love mathematics, it's just brilliant. So I went off to do a degree in maths, thinking I could still go and do the other things. And decided what I really wanted to do was be a teacher. So I went along, and you probably know this, but if you want to be a teacher, there's a variety of ways in, but one of the most common is you do a degree in the subject you love, and then you do something called a postgraduate certificate in education, or a PGCE. So I met up with my friend John Haynes, again still friends with him now, and we cycled together to the education school at the university where I was, and we wandered in, we sat down together, we were joking and bantering and that, and the guy stood up at the front of the room, and he said something like, turn to the person next to you and tell them why you want to teach. I can't honestly remember what it was, but it was something that kind of banal. And I turned to John and said, I think I'm going to be sick, I need to go, because it was honestly like the word no was made out of metal and bouncing around inside my head. I was seeing lights, I literally felt like I was going to throw up. It was just horrible. So I slipped her out the back. John obviously stayed there, and sat down on this kind of bench pew thing outside the room. Honestly, within about 30 seconds, I felt right as rain. So I wandered outside, I unlocked my bicycle, and I cycled back to my house on Perringsey Road, and said to Jesus, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm really clear you don't want me to be a teacher. And it was kind of like, you know, Numbers 22, where God sends an ass, a donkey, to stand in the way and tell Balaam, who's his prophet, that he's doing the wrong thing. It kind of felt like that God was saying, nope, you're not going to do this. And I was like, oh, okay, so what am I going to do then? And the other thing I really loved doing was youth work. That's why I wanted to go into teaching. So I got a job being a youth worker in the centre of Coventry, which was quite interesting in the 1990s, if you remember news about Coventry in the 1990s. So I remember one time my mum woke me up horrendously early, sort of 10 o'clock in the morning as a youth worker. And she was like, darling, are you all right? I was like, oh, it was Mum, till you wrote, yeah. There's been riots! I was like, don't be stupid, of course they haven't. Opening the curtains. Oh, maybe they're happy riots, but I'm fine, it's all right.
So you sort of went into youth work, still within the Baptist church?
No, I'd become an Anglican by accident whilst at university. So I went. My college was literally across the road from a church called St Aldate's. But oddly, my son still worships. I mean, not still worships. He's gone to the same university subsequently, and he worships there. And the Christian Union at the time did a church crawl. So basically, they would take you around, and you could try the different churches around Oxford. And I went there on the first week. The service started at 10:15. I was at Christ Church across the road, so I could be out of bed at 10 o'clock. I got there, I discovered they preached the Bible. Never realised that Anglicans preached the Bible. And that actually, there was something about the Church of England that reminded us that God is always bigger than the box that we try to put him in. So there's a philosopher called Nietzsche who's reputed to have said, in the beginning, God created man in his image. He spoke before politically correct things. And man has been repaying the favour ever since. Which I just think is a brilliant, I mean, he doesn't say it in English because he spoke German, if I remember right. But anyway, he made the point. And we do that all the time. We make an image of God and then we let God kind of contract into the image that we've made of him. And there's something about being Anglican that reminds us that God is always bigger than the box that we put him in. So I fell in love with the Anglican Church really unwillingly. I was confirmed whilst I was there. Penti Ponti, if you remember, Bishop Pontefract came and did some confirmations. And then went into youth work in Holy Trinity in the centre of Coventry. What did you ask me? I've gone off on one.
That's all right.
Is that all right?
Yeah, because I'm not sure where I'm going either. So, Lindsay, how did you sort of meet and sort of marry, and do you have a family?
Yes, we met. Well, we both read maths, so it was a mutual friend's room, and I remember Lindsay walking in and just being completely scruffy and utterly gorgeous. So she also worshipped at St Aldate's, so we kind of, what's the phrase? Courted. So we walked out together. And then got married in Coventry. What else? We've got 2 kids, mentioned those. So they're both students. Pippa is 3rd year reading medicine. And then Jonathan, my son, has just started a DPhil, so a doctorate in computer science. So he's horrendously clever. It's just last summer we happened to have a couple of nights where Lindsay and Pippa were away doing other things. So it was only Jonathan and me in the caravan. And one afternoon I was sitting in the awning, and Jonathan was in the caravan just kind of tinkering away on the computer and what have you. And he was clearly having a conversation with one of his geeky computer mates. And I can honestly say I understood every single word that he said, but not one single sentence. I mean, it's just amazing.
So, yes, can we get on to then? Some of you, I mean, you have an interest, I hear, in scuba diving.
Well, I do love scuba diving, but I haven't done it for years. I was ordained here in this diocese last millennium, and then went from here to be vicar of the Red Light District in Doncaster. Which I always say is the kind of place that Jesus would be vicar of if Jesus was a vicar. But I don't know whether you find the same. I found that my whole life was being caught up with church. So all the time I was just seeing Christian people. And that's kind of not how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to meet folk, become friends. And actually, John 10:10 says, Jesus said, I've come that they might have life and have it to the full. So one of the things I often say to vicars is make sure you get a life. And the way I tried to do it when I was there was I joined a scuba diving club. So 9 o'clock every Wednesday evening, if the bishop wasn't in my church, I would be down at the scuba diving club. And I love it, it's just brilliant. But at the moment, I haven't got anyone to go diving with or what have you. It takes quite a lot of time.
And I know you have another passion as well, because obviously when you became Bishop of Berwick, which you can mention in a moment, but you used to ride or drive over to Huntley Spring to speak at the men's curry night. You would arrive in your leathers and crash helmet.
You're absolutely right. I wondered where you were going with that. I've got a lifelong love of riding motorbikes. So I mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, that I grew up farming with some really close friends of ours, again through the Baptist Church in Leicestershire this was. So from the age of, I can't remember how old, I was working on the farm. First summer I spent working all summer on the farm was age 13, so I could already drive a massive Ferguson tractor, the little red ones. So I used to bring the grain in and take the cows to the milking parlour and do that kind of stuff. But it was quite a long way away from where we lived, so I got myself a motorcycle, and as soon as it was legal I rode it on the road, and I've ridden ever since, so I love riding bikes.
Do you still have your bike then?
I still have at least one motorbike. Don't ask me.
In Chester, or is this
no, in Chester, there are several bikes in the garage. In fact, it's really useful there are, because I don't know if you know where the bishop lives in Chester, but it's right by the cathedral. So one Sunday about, it probably was October, November, I was due to do a confirmation service in the morning in Bunbury, which is half an hour away or so from Chester. So I get in the car and recorded beforehand, I've got all the stuff shoved in the boot, drive out of Abbey Square, and there's this kind of metal railing across the gateway. And so I kind of get out and say to the man, look, I'm really sorry, I need to get out. Car What do you mean you can't? Got to. You can't. Well, I really have to. I've got to go before. Can't, it's the marathon. What do you mean it's a marathon? I've got to go and do this thing. And he's like, I'm sorry, it's shut at like whatever time, it can't get out. It's like, you've got to move, it's more than my job's worth, mate, he said, which I thought, that was only said kind of on. So I'm like, what do I do? So I ring Tim, who's the vicar of Bunbury, and say, well, I tried to say to him, look, can you come and pick me up? You've got about, if you get in the car now, we'll screech in about 2 minutes. Well, he wasn't answering his phone. I think he saw Bishop Mark come up on the screen and thought, I'm not answering him. I said, well, what on earth do I do? I'll never get a taxi. And I'll tell you what I did. I got onto a little one of the bikes I've got is a little 125 motorbike. And I got through my robes in the back of it, shoved my stick, which is actually in a gun case. I'm not exaggerating. It's the best way to carry it because it kind of folds in half. So slung that across my back. And rode down kind of along and then through the city walls, and then bounced down the steps into the car park, the one-way down a one-way street, thinking, what am I going to do if someone pulls over somebody for like riding on a one-way street with a gun case on their back? Can you imagine kind of pulling down the thing, I am the Bishop of Chester, honestly. Anyway, I made it with about 7 minutes to spare. Poor old Tim, I mean, he started off with a full head of hair, he had none by the time I arrived. So they were really irritated until they heard the story, and then it became the coolest confirmation ever.
Yeah. So you became from Doncaster. Did you become Bishop of Berwick from then? Or?
No, moved from Doncaster to Ripon in North Yorkshire, which was just, I imagined I'd been in that job for about 25 years, to be honest. So the kids went into school there, they were really, really happy. I was doing quite a lot of stuff nationally with an organisation called New Wine, which I really enjoyed doing. I was also a part-time army chaplain, because about a quarter of the people in my parish were army with 2 engineer regiment, and that was a really profound kind of experience of just sharing faith in a different environment. So I had 2 church schools, 4 schools in the parish, 2 church schools, and 24.8%, and I know that number exactly, because if it was more than 25%, we would have got extra funding from the government, and it was just underneath. But so 24.8% of the children were Greed, so children of army families. And it was just a brilliant job, and I loved doing it. And then God came in from left field and just kind of suddenly swooped me up to be vicar, to run the vicar factory in Durham. So that was my that's what I did. So we had this great secret installation just near Durham Cathedral, and our job basically was to take perfectly ordinary people and shove them in at one end of the vicar factory machine. And I pressed a big purple button, and about 3 years later they came out and said, "The Lord be with you." So I was 4 years in Ripon. As I say, I literally imagined I'd been there 20 years. It was the kind of job I'd always wanted. But I got scooped up to take to Durham, and from there I went to be Bishop of Berwick. So.
And from there you came to Chester.
Yeah. Didn't see that coming either, but the Lord's got a sense of humour.
So how long have you been in now in Chester?
About 300 years. So I legally became a bishop on July the 17th, I think, 2020. Mid-July anyway, 2020. But with COVID and stuff, we actually moved across at the beginning of September. So 18 months, give or take. Yeah.
Are you enjoying it?
Basically, I'm loving it. I mean, I love being back in the diocese. As I say, I was ordained here, so we feel really at home. There's a whole lot of stuff that Bishop gets to deal with, which is a huge privilege, and you get to come and be part of fun gigs like this. And then there's a load of stuff which, if I'm honest, I don't really enjoy. So I think you've got the best job in the Church of England there.
I would agree.
So whilst I love coming to things like this, it is a bit hit and run. So I probably won't see most of you again for several weeks, if not months. And I really miss that sharing. There is nothing more exciting in life than seeing people discover the purpose that God has for their life. So the change that you made when Jesus becomes part of that life, it's the most amazing thing. And to be able to accompany that is it's the privilege beyond privilege. So yes, I love it, and I really miss being a vicar.
So if you're sort of thinking, as the Bishop of Chester, what would you say are the sort of challenges, opportunities that you're presented with, or you see the diocese as being presented with at the moment?
I can tell you exactly what they are. So tonight in this diocese we have 1.65 million people. It's 1.65 million people. And at a very most generous estimate, there'll be 100,000 of those who have some kind of living faith in Jesus Christ. Which means that tonight they will go to bed with a sense of peace that we take for granted when we realise that God's not some fairy tale, that He's really there and He's really on our side. that they have that sense of reconciliation with themselves and with others, which is the very heart of our faith. And that sense of peace, of hope, of reconciliation, we almost begin to take for granted when we've been Christians for a long time. And there will be about 100,000 people who have some sense of that in the diocese. But that means that there are more than 1.5 million people tonight who go to bed without that. I'll just say that again, because if that doesn't shock you, then actually we need to wake up and we need to start praying. 1.5 million people on our watch will go to bed without a recognition of the thing that we believe is not only a kind of really useful thing to know, but is the foundational thing that life can be built on, the free gift of God in our Lord Jesus Christ. We're just embarking on a vision process as a diocese, and it will roll out probably over the next 18 months in terms of trying to prioritise what we do together as a diocese and what it just kind of happens individually in different places. And I can't tell you where that's going to end up, but I can tell you this: if we are not talking about planting 1.5 million seeds of the gospel, then we won't have Jesus' gospel in our heart. So Jesus told, and I can't remember if I said this when I came and preached for you for a few weeks ago, but Jesus told all sorts of stories about what his priorities were. Did I say this when I came to preach? So when Jesus came, he said, I've got 2 priorities. And he was really clear about them, and I'll tell you exactly what they were. The first was to pay the parish share, and the second was to have decent coffee.
Which gospel did you find that?
The gospel according to George Culver. No, I'll tell you, he's the Dawson secretary, in case that's a new joke. When Jesus came, he said, I have got 2 priorities, and they are these: to seek and to save the lost. It's to seek, i.e. to go and find them, because people will not come to us. Most people think the Church of England is old, grey and dull, and that's deeply untrue, but that's what most people think about us. So we need to go and find people. If we really believe we've got good news, we need to go and find people. And when we find them, we need to offer them the salvation that Jesus offers. And we need to give every last ounce of energy we've got to that. So think of another story that Jesus told, and it concerns a shepherd who has 100 sheep. And in that dodgy gospel I was just telling you about, I'll tell you how the story goes. Shepherd, 100 sheep, one morning comes down and starts to count his sheep. Shepherds are a bit dim, so it takes him a while, but this morning it's really easy because he goes, 1. Sure, I had more than that last night. 1. Oh no, he says, I've lost 99 of my sheep. What am I going to do? Well, he scratches his head and then he remembers what his old dad used to say to him: son, so long as you have 1 sheep, you are still a shepherd. And so he locks the sheep in the barn, makes sure it can't get out, and goes to bed a happy man because he's got 1 sheep, and so he's still a shepherd. Do you remember that story from your Bible?
No. The figures are slightly different in my Bible.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you the story Jesus really told. And in order to understand it, what you need to know is that in the 1st century, shepherds were regarded as being utterly thick. It's unfair, of course, but completely thick. They kind of told shepherd jokes in the way we used to tell Irishman jokes before we got politically correct. So, how do you sink a shepherd's submarine? You knock on the door. How do you burn a shepherd's ear? You ring him up when he's ironing. Those are the kind of jokes they used to tell. So Jesus goes down to the tavern at Nazareth and says, I've got this really good story about a shepherd. And they all kind of lean in expecting something genuinely funny, not like the stuff I'm dribbling out now. It's funny. He says, okay, so this shepherd, he's got 100 sheep. They say, got it, shepherd, 100 sheep. He says he goes down in the morning, he counts them. 1, 2, miss a few, 99. Oh, sure I had 100. Let's try again. 1, 2, miss a few, 99. I've lost one of my sheep, he says. You'll never guess what the shepherd did. And before Jesus can get the punchline in, some wisecracker on a pint of Bethlehem's best mild over here just leans in. I'll tell you what he does. He leaves the 99 and goes off looking for the 1. Because everybody knows that if you leave 99 sheep by themselves, they end up eaten by wolves and lions. And the bar is laughing just like you're not. And as the laughter dies down, Jesus leans in and says, exactly. And that's the kind of God I've come to tell you about. The God who is so recklessly in love with the 1 lost sheep that he'll risk the 99 to find the 1. And I have to say, in the Diocese of Chester, we've got about 3 sheep left. And the trouble is that we're more interested in the 3 sheep we've got than the 97 who are lost. And Jesus is beginning to hold us to account and say, what about the 1.5 million seeds that you need to plant? And that's what this is about. That's why I'm so encouraged to be here, because actually the church being out of the building, in the community, open to everyone. This is the seeking and saving stuff that we need to be doing. And incidentally, if you're here tonight and you're thinking, I don't know if I know that hope that the bishop's banging on about, come and talk to Derek, and he will lay on a course so you can discover the hope that Jesus has come to bring. It's the best thing you'll ever do with your life. And you're watching on video, the same offer for you. You matter, not just because I'm the bishop and I say so, but because Jesus is God and he says so. So come and talk to this man. He'll organise a course and he'll tell you how you can know this news, this good news, that will build your life for the better, for yourself.
Thank you.
You will, won't you?
Oh, I will definitely, yes. It was just, yes, I mean, I'm aware that the three bishops are going to be kind of visiting us here in the deanery week after next. I mean, obviously, you're just wanting to be out there and meet people, aren't you? I mean, I take it that's kind of a deliberate, yes, let's get out and see.
Yeah, it is. I've caused complete chaos in the diocese in so many ways. But one way I've caused chaos is, when I said I want to go around and visit the deaneries, people assumed I wanted to go and sit in vicars' houses and drink tea. And nothing wrong with vicars' houses. I love you all to bits and your tea will be very nice. And I said, look, I'm really not interested in that, because we'll meet each other in all sorts of ways. I want you to take me into like schools or shops or workplaces or wherever it is in order to meet people, because actually the Diocese of Chester is not the churches of Chester and it's not the vicarages of Chester, it's the 1.65 million people. So yeah, we need to get out there and we need to be far less ashamed about actually saying, this Jesus is my best friend and he's changed my life, would you like to meet him?
I do know you're going to Stelmo and various other places next week, so you just feel, what an opportunity. They've opened, the doors are open, and you just feel, that's
And I'll
good.
tell you this, people who are not part of the church are far more interested in this God stuff, and they often won't have language for it, than we believe they are, because people know that there's something missing from life without the one that we have discovered is our Lord Jesus Christ right at the heart of it. And COVID has absolutely blown the kind of lid off the fact. Because too often in the West, where we basically, and I know there's huge issues of poverty and what have you, but we basically can expect to have a roof over our head, and we can basically expect health provision, and we can basically expect good education. Too often we can think we have that as if, we have a right to it. But what COVID has done, among other things, is remind us that we're all vulnerable. And there's a massive hole in the centre of our lives if we haven't discovered that God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ filling it with his hope. It's the way God always intended us to be.
Thank you so much. Are you happy to sort of round off with a thought, or would you say,
Yeah, whatever you like. I mean,
no, that'd be really nice just to leave us with some kind of, challenge.
Brilliant. My thought is this. So Luke chapter 8, there's this kind of record of an interaction between Jesus and his disciples. So basically, Jesus has been teaching all day, and he's pretty whacked. And his disciples, his closest friends, have been fishermen, so they've got a boat. Jesus spots it and says, how about we go across to the other side of the lake, because it'll be quieter over there. Little did he know what was going to meet him, but that's later on in the story. You can read that for yourselves. So, Jesus and the disciples hop in the boat. They kind of push out. Disciples know exactly what they're doing. And Jesus nods off. Bless him. He's been busy. And then the Bible says a squall came along, which I think is probably one of those understatements. It's kind of like Luke 15, where the younger son gets all the money and goes off and squanders it in wild living. I love the way that the Bible puts some of these things. So basically, there's a massive storm that comes down on the lake. And the reason we know it's massive is because the disciples had spent all their life fishing, and they thought they were going to drown. They were absolutely terrified. So what they do is they wake up Jesus and say, we are going to drown, the storm is too violent, help, how can you possibly be asleep? Jesus stands up in the boat, he speaks to the wind and to the waves and says, be still. And then he turns around and says to the disciples, where was your faith? And I've got to say, I've always had problems with that question. Because I kind of imagine that Jesus was a bit mardy or moody or grumpy at that point. He's a nice kid. And the disciples should have known better. They've woken him up, he sorts it out and goes, for goodness sake, where was your faith? But actually, as I've reread that story in the last few days, I've just found myself reading it a completely different way. And there are three things I want to tell you. Firstly, please remember that bad things will happen to good people. Not because you're bad, Not because God has abandoned you, but because we live in a really tough and broken world. And the fact that you go through difficult times doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. The Bible never says that God's going to give you an easy ride when you become a Christian. It makes a far better promise than that. It says that when you find yourself in the boat in the storm, you'll find that Jesus is already in that boat with you. That's the amazing thing about following Jesus. He will never leave you or abandon you, and life will never get beyond his ability to help you. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I want to say to you, remember that the Jesus that we turn to is all-powerful. The disciples are terrified in the end, not because of the storm, but because Jesus could stand up in the middle of it and say, "Be still," and the wind and the waves obey him. The Jesus that we follow is big enough for the issues that we will face, and big enough for the issues that your friends will face. So if you're at school, or if you're at work, or if you bump into somebody on the street, and you think, "I'd love for you to know this Jesus that I love and serve, but I don't know if he's big enough," remember, Jesus is always big enough to deal with the issues that we face. And the third thing which I really notice about that is that Jesus is not cross that they've woken him up. The word that he uses is literally, "Where is your faith?" And the problem the disciples have is not that they've lacked faith, it's that they put it in the wrong place. They wake him up and they don't say, "We're worried about the wind and the waves, have you got any good ideas?" They say, "We are going to die." That's what they say, "We are going to die." They believe that the storm will kill them. You know this because you've been to Vicar Factory and all that. But the Greek word for faith, pistos, just means believe or trust. They trust in the storm, not in Jesus. And Jesus says, "How about you come to me first next time? How about you trust me when I say I'm going to be with you?" I've been a Christian for years and years and years, literally since I was 8 years old, so 40 plus years. And I have to say, even today, something will challenge me, what have you, and I will try and deal with it by some great good idea I've got, or by asking so-and-so to do it, or what have you. And about 3 decades later, I'll think, how about I pray about this? And it's as if God slaps me around the face with a wet fish and says, "Tanner, will you wake up? How about you stop putting your trust in the idea that this is going to go wrong, or that that's too difficult, or that you can't cope with this, or that so-and-so is going to let you down again, and start putting your faith in me." Jesus is never irritated when you wake him up. Honestly, he's never irritated when you wake him up. But he will constantly say to you, "How about you come to me first, and then be amazed at what I can do when you place your faith in me." And it doesn't matter whether that's for your first time you've ever heard that tonight and you think, "I'm going to take that risk and put my trust in him," or whether you've been a Christian for 437 years. The message is the same: trust, trust, trust. Can I just finish with one story? When I've got the kids' permission to tell you this. When I was vicar in Ripponstone, and can you just knock your microphone off so that when listening stops? Just so, thank you. The kids were really happy, and I got this letter out of the blue saying, "I want you to come and be warden at Cranmer Hall." And I've always believed that part of the job of a parent is helping the children to learn to trust what Jesus is doing. So we had the conversation with them, and to my great surprise, I was invited to go and be interviewed up there. And it was a horrendous interview process, but there was about 10 minutes in the middle of the day when I could ring home and talk to Lindsay and the kids. And so I spoke to the children. They were both under 10, and they don't mind me telling the story, but prefer me not to say who said what. So I was chatting to one of them, and they said to me, "Daddy, what's Jesus been saying to you today about this?" And so I told them what I've been praying about, what I believe Jesus has been saying. That's a whole other story, asked me on another occasion. And I said to this child, I said, "Love, tell me, what's Jesus been saying to you today about this?" And this 8-year-old child said to me as I was standing on the hallway stairs in a theological college in England, he said, "Daddy, I've been praying all day long, and all Jesus has said to me is the same thing over and over and over again." And I said, "Love, what's Jesus been saying?" And this child said to me, "Trust, trust, trust, trust. And I stood there trying to hold back the tears and knowing that an 8-year-old had just taught me how to follow Jesus.
Bishop Mark, thank you so much. Well, for coming today and to just sharing your story with us, but also for that amazing challenge. And yes, we would like people to seriously think about Jesus. And obviously, at this point, I'm just going to mention that I'm going to put some books on this chair here. If you'd like to take a free book, please take one. Most of them, I think, are all stories of folk who have come to that point that Bishop Mark's been speaking about, where you just put your trust in Jesus. And so, please take what you'd like. Well, thank you so much. If you are prepared to just pop round the tables and say hello to folk, that would be lovely. But thank you all. And again, thank you to Costa. And we'll be back soon. But thank you so much for coming.
Good.